Well, welcome to the lecture series for Celebration 2014, the second lecture talking about the documenting Tlingit Raven stories. And it's a distinct privilege for me to introduce Nora Marks Dauenhauer and Richard Dauenhauer. They don't really need a lot of introduction. I could spend a half hour depending on what we want to do today, but everyone knows here they are scholars of Tlingit language, culture, and oral tradition, and each in their own right is a writer and a poet. Together they have produced and edited 4 volumes in a series entitled Classics of Tlingit Oral Literature, which truly are classics. The latest in the series, entitled Russians in Tlingit America, published in 2008 by the University of Washington Press and Sealaska Heritage Institute, won an American Book Award as one of these did, or both.
Oratory.
Yeah, they were, yeah. Won the first one in this series, right? Yeah, the second one. Won an American Book Award. Nora has written at least 2 volumes of poetry, 3 Raven plays, a book of essays, and with her husband, a book of Tlingit grammar lessons. Her numerous awards include being a Poet Laureate of Alaska, the Alaska Humanist Award of the Year, a Community Spirit Award from the First Peoples Fund, an Alaska Women's Hall of Fame, and an EcoTrust Indigenous Leadership Award. And like I said, I could go on and on. Richard was a former Poet Laureate of the state as well. He has written 3 volumes of poetry and published many poems and translations of oral epics in various journals, in addition to his works in Tlingit language and oral traditions. So I want to let them have the floor and not me. So you are welcome.
Thank you, Chuck. Good to be here. This is going to be very low key. We'll give you a kind of a walkthrough of our projected Raven book and tell you about some of the excitement of doing that, and open it to any questions that you have from the audience. Let me see if Nora has any opening comments, and then we'll give you the brief history of this. Has been a 40-year project, so we're going to condense it. So.
Well, it's been more than 40 years for me, because I started to work on transcribing, translating as a teacher at the Juneau Douglas High School. I was a teacher there, and I got a letter from this guy here, and told me that he liked what I was doing. I don't know how he found out. Anyway, I started to take a bunch of teenagers to the village areas and worked with them, trying to show them. See, the problem was the students had no knowledge of Tlingit. And when I was a kid, that's all we spoke was Tlingit. And these kids didn't know. As teenagers, they didn't know a thing. So I went with them anyway. And I came across a man in Angoon. His name was Bob
Zuboff.
Robert Zuboff. And he was very generous with me. I asked him if I could tape, and he agreed, and we worked at it. And if it was Raven or another story. Anyway, I taped with him. So from that time on, I was taping stories from people. Sometimes they just gave me the tape deck. They knew I was, they found out I was transcribing them in Tlingit. And the Tlingit speakers, at least 2 of them, offered me their tapes of stories. And the very person I was really afraid of gave me a tape and told me maybe you could make a book out of that. There was Kakachkuk. Kakachkuk was the man who sailed out from Sitka by accident. And the man wanted me to write it out. I didn't know if I could, but I tried. And from that time on, I was just going along with transcribing, translating, and taping people. It became a job. Okay. I worked for the University of Alaska Fairbanks for Dr. Krause. And that was it.
Yeah, as Nora mentioned, that probably, I sort of think of it when her recordings with Robert Zuboff as kind of the beginning of the Raven, and that was 1972, so we've been at it for that long. As Nora mentioned, we worked for Alaska Native Language Center. The next big chunk as far as the book is concerned, in 1983, come on in folks, lots of room, I think, so we're on the side here, and come and join us. We moved to Southeast. I was teaching originally at Alaska Methodist University. They went belly up, reconstituted as Alaska Pacific University. So I was hired on there, but we decided we really wanted to be down here. And we had some money. We had a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. We didn't have a match. Sealaska Heritage Foundation had a grant, and they couldn't get a match. So we matched. So we got the feds to agree to match with the state, and the state to match with the feds. So that started language and cultural studies at Sealaska. So I guess the defining moment in the Raven project was we had field tests, and Chuck showed you some of the books. We had some narratives, we had the oratory, and then we had some Raven stories. And we did some field testing, and with the Raven stories, nobody laughed. And we were wondering what the problem was. And mainly it was how humor doesn't really cross cultures very well. So if somebody gives you Japanese satire, you're really not going to be sure whether you're supposed to be laughing at it, because you got to know, what's normal before you know what's abnormal. So a lot of people just didn't know, and we figured, well, people understand tragedy. Everybody understands death, dying, loss. So that's why we did the narratives book first, because that was something that everybody responded to. Likewise, the oratory. And Raven kept kind of being set aside, and then people liked the biographies in our first and second book, so we did a whole book on biographies. And then we had another long-range project on the battles of Sitka, and there was some concern in the community. Some people wanted the story told, some didn't. Finally got the go-ahead on that book, so that became volume 4, and poor Raven is still out there in the rain. So finally we decided this is it, we're going to move ahead on it. Nora and I got a grant from the National Science Foundation for the documentation of the Raven stories. In the meantime, I can't explain, or I guess emphasize how much technology has changed in the 40 years since we've started doing this. Mm-hmm. You know, the most recent contribution to the book, Lance Twitchell videoed Nora and put it on YouTube. And so now, you know, you can have the picture of somebody, the audio, you can have the subtitles and the transcription of the writing on the screen. None of this was back, 1972. And the kids would say, well, why didn't you do a camcorder? And say, well, hey kids, when did this stuff all come into being? So we're at a real good juncture here, and it's been a little bit frustrating, and as we age, and so the younger people are more up on the new technology. So the very latest installation on the book is we're relying heavily now on the younger generation. So we're getting a lot of help from Carrie Edwards and Lance Twitchell and Ishmael Hope with working with Nora and with me, and as we enter into the golden years, and Nora's hearing has become kind of a problem, and neither of us have the energy we had in 1972. Okay, what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about Raven and maybe what we think he isn't, and then I'll just give you a walk through the contents, because we're having trouble with biographies for a couple of people, so I'm hoping there are folks in the room that might have pictures of them or relatives or be relatives and can help us. But as I said, the big problem with humor is it doesn't go across cultures very well. So it takes sometimes some problems. Nora has to tell people it's okay to laugh because it seems to be politically incorrect to laugh, and yet these are the funniest, most outrageous stories going, and everybody's kind of saying, oh my God, it's like being in church. I can't laugh. This is God. This is it's politically incorrect to laugh. Well, we say, well, first of all, Raven is not God.
There's a new batch of people that have Raven for God. I don't.
There's one thing that Raven is pretty not is God. Sometimes people talk about the creator, but if you look at the Raven stories, what's interesting is Raven comes on to the created world. I mean, the world is already created. It's all there, except it's not user-friendly. Everything is in the wrong place. It's not economically equal. I mean, it's always the rich guy has got the sun, moon, and the stars. Some other guy's got water. He's hoarding it out in the middle of the ocean. Somebody else has got the salmon run. And the poor folks on the beach can't get the salmon. They can't get water. They don't have this. They don't have that. And then there's some other things too. So Raven is, in some cultures, is called the culture hero. He's the guy that sets things straight. He comes along, and he's not really the creator, but he rearranges it. The anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss calls him the jack of all trades. He's sort of a handyman. So he's the guy you call when something is not quite right with your plumbing and you need it tweaked, and so the guy doesn't come in and install the plumbing from scratch. He works on it, and he arranges it, and he works on your car. He keeps it going when it's 20 years old and stuff like that. And he's also called the trickster, and trickster figures are common around the world. Africa, you get the spider, you get Brer Rabbit ultimately, as a trickster figure. Northwest coast, it's raven. It moves down the coast, you get into other birds, a blue jay, get into mink, of course, coyote and the roadrunner. These are all these guys that are up to no good. And I guess in modern psychological terms, he has trouble with what do you call it, an open, honest relationship. I mean, he's got to connive to get what he wants. He's always got to con somebody out of it. I mean, he isn't able to work on this as a mature adult. He's a morally ambivalent character, so people generally, the world is better for what Raven rearranged, but usually it comes out of his own greed, his own lust. I mean, he's just could usually care less about people, and we sort of get the leftovers. And so I'll mention some of these stories as we go along. But anyhow, let me stop and see if any questions thus far before I get into. I'll tell you what the book is going to look like and where we might need some help. If anybody has any questions at this point, just about Raven in general, we're happy to entertain them. And if not, we'll move on. Just
the only thing I'd like to mention as a child, I remember the grandparents telling stories and laughing till there were tears coming out of their eyes. Well, we wanted to laugh too. They sit and think and says, it's so hard because a single word to describe how a man looked, how he walked, how he staggered, whatever. So they weren't able to translate the story to us so we could laugh. And that reminded me of that just.
Yeah, that's a good. Could everybody hear him? Yeah, that's a good comment. And a lot of these things don't translate well, and then also the motives. I mean, sometimes he'll do something and say, "Gee, it's, I don't know."
The point of view is different.
Yeah, so that's a good comment. We'll have most of the stories. We'll have Tlingit on one page. They'll have English on the other. We have several stories that were told in English, so that's been fun too, because Robert Zuboff and Catherine Mills especially were just great stylists in English, and so we have one of Catherine telling the same story in Tlingit and then in English, and again with Robert Zuboff. And Robert Zuboff uses a style of English people sometimes call village English, and it's great because it's a version of English that sort of has its own grammar, and he can do things in that you can't do in standard English with the grammar. You'll see that in the book. So we have two quite lengthy tellings in English, and then also now due to the technology, we'll be able to access some, if not all of these, somehow or other. We haven't quite figured out. It would probably be through a website at Sealaska. But as they say, the kids are already there. They've got Nora on YouTube. She'll be. We don't have Robert Zuboff, unfortunately. Well, anyhow, there'll be an introduction, and I did a draft of that several years ago, and it's much too long. But we'll shorten it. But so the first chapter is Raven's reality check, Raven and Tlingit origin story. So it's about Tlingit. Then the paper trail. There's Raven has been written about for over 200 years, and there are Russian versions of the stories, German versions, and English versions. This book will be the first Tlingit versions. I mean, in the Tlingit language. Then I have a chapter, Domestic Realms of Raven, Raven on the Northwest Coast and in Alaska. Raven is a big figure in Athabaskan oral literature and quite different in Yupik and Aleut. Then Wider Realms of Raven. Raven is very popular in Siberia. In Koryak, for example, there are about 70% overlap with the Tlingit versions. So this is a kind of an interesting scholarly issue, is why there is this band of Raven stuff like in Kamchatka and that area, and then in Alaska, but it's not quite the same in Eskimo and Aleut. So there's a theory called the Eskimo wedge the suggestion is that the Eskimo and Aleut peoples moved into that area and separated what was more of a common culture area. Raven in Siberia is very interesting. He's a married man. He's got kids. He's a family man. And one of my favorite stories is pretty not X-rated. It's just sort of scatological. He's going through middle-age crisis, and he brings home what he thinks is this beautiful woman. And his wife and his kids are saying, Daddy's kind of not quite there, because what he perceives as the woman is actually this enormous dog turd. But Raven is kind of deluded, and he brings his new girlfriend home, and that doesn't quite work out, but I'll leave anyhow, that's Siberia, so he's over there. And then I have a chapter tentatively called Raven Dares You. So many ways of looking at a blackbird, a century of evolving concepts of raven and trickster. So if you're interested in the scholarship, everybody's had a crack at Raven. The Freudians, the Jungians, all of the various sociologists. Are we talking about coming of mature age and culture? And meanwhile, my favorite is a woman who says Raven is ultimately what she calls a liminal character. You can't pigeonhole him, and everybody's trying to box him in, and he's sort of hopping around the edge. The theologians have had a crack at him. In fact, one of the best books is written by a Jesuit priest, just about the whole idea of knowing ourselves and challenging and coming of age, and that's what the Jungi is like. Are people being mature? And so anyhow, there's something there. As I say, there'll be an introduction. But anyhow, in alphabetical order, and this will give you a range too of the time here that we're dealing with. So the most recent, to our surprise, is Nora. Lance Twitchell recorded it, and Ishmael transcribed it and sent it to us as an email, and it was kind of a surprise. I thought, wow, I didn't know that this was happening, but we'll stick her in. George Davis of Angoon. Nora worked with George Davis, and we have some stories. Ishmael has located what's one of the rarest stories that he's telling about Raven and the Marmot people. So it's an unusual story, but so that's George Davis in there. We have a cycle of stories by Frank Dick of Yakutat, and Fred White was the person who did the drafts on these, and these are from 1983. Austin Hammond, we have two. One is Raven Loses His Nose, just an outrageously funny story. Not too many people tell it, but the people are jigging for halibut, and Raven is going underwater, and he's grabbing the bait, and eating it, and he finally gets snagged, and he's coming up under the boat, and his nose rips off, and people take it to town. And anyhow, Nora did a play on this. It's really quite good. So Raven then has to get a consultant, or he has to figure out how to get his nose back. And the museum people are trying to figure out what to do with it. And the other by Austin is one we're working on right now. Dan Henry recorded him in 1985, and then they did a bilingual play on the radio where they have electronic music and sound effects and stuff like that, and so they translated it. So there's a little bit of Austin and then the English. So we'll have the English version, and then we'll have his Austin's Tlingit of Raven in the Fog Hat. And it's with his brother-in-law Quanuk. Probably the most important in terms of age is Frank Itelio, who's Nora's great-grandfather, was recorded by Freddie de Laguna in Yakutat in 1952. And we'd been working on these. She also recorded him in 1954. So there's some episodes in there, and these are the oldest we have. So the 1952, and we were missing. We didn't realize till late last year that we were missing a whole interview, and the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia gave us a nice clean set to begin with. So Nora's working on that one right now. Susie James from Sitka, some of you may remember her. She, remarkable storyteller, very hard to transcribe because she talks a mile a minute. She's really,
Talks nothing but Tlingit.
yeah. Anyhow, we have a lot of stories. We have 11 stories by her, some of which are kind of rare. The Raven in His Eyes and Raven when crashes the killer whale people's potlatch and stuff like that. Jimmy Johnson from Angoon, he was recorded in 1963 by Constance Nash and Gillian Story. And Connie and Gillian, when they retired, gave us all of their material, and we've been working on it at different projects. So this particular one, I think it was Robbie Littlefield and Ethel Mekinen we're working on it, because we had a transcription by Connie and Gillian, and we had the story, and so I gave that to them as a class project in Tlingit. He's one, if any of you are related, he's one that we do need some help on with his biography, and we don't have a picture. And he was from Angoon. I'm not sure when he died. I have a draft of his biography, but we don't have a picture. Jimmy Johnson from Angoon.
I don't know him.
Yeah, we didn't work with him personally, and but we're happy to have the story. It's one of the oldest recorded, and one of the newest, Sam Johnston from the interior. Lance Twitchell recorded him in Teslin last summer, and his stories are kind of fun. Again, one very rare one, Raven and the Blueberries. Charlie Joseph from Sitka recorded in the early 1980s. This is Ethel Mekinen's father. If you saw the Sitka dancers this morning, they were mentioning Charlie a lot in their presentation. So we have, again, two kind of unusual stories. One is Raven Goes to Potlatch, which is kind of fun, and that's the origin of dance. And then another one on the Hooligan Run. We have 3 tellings by Nora's mother. 2 of them are, one was first told in 1972, and then the other was told again in 1997. So from the folklore point of view, this is kind of interesting to have the same story told by the same person over a long period of time, because sometimes it can show quite a bit of difference. For example, in Mike Krause's book on Eyak, Anna Nelson Harry tells some stories way back in the 30s, and then he worked again with her in the 1960s. And so it's the same story, but her attitude toward the characters is really quite a bit different. As she's an older woman, she's been through the loss of children, she's approaching her own immortality or her own mortality and all of that. So it's really interesting how you can get this tentatively or theoretically the same story, but it differs quite a bit in terms of the characters. Willie Marks, Nora's father, we've got some good stories by him. Catherine Mills, some of you know her from Hoona, a tremendous storyteller. We have 6 stories by her, including some fairly uncommon ones, like Why Raven is Always Hungry. Tom Ukas from Wrangell. Again, if any of you are related, we need some pictures, and Ishmael is working a little bit on his biography. We just discovered, or Ishmael just discovered, some new recordings at Sealaska that we didn't know about. The one that we were working with was recorded in 1972, just before he died, and I think he'd had a stroke, and he was very hard to understand in places because of the quality of the tape and his own health. But anyhow, he's an interesting, very interesting and not terribly well documented storyteller. So finally we got Robert Zuboff that Nora mentioned, and we have several versions of him in Tlingit. We have some in English. We have very interesting where he told a story about Raven in the salmon box to Nora, And then a couple of weeks later, or a week later, he told it to Henry Davis. So we have the same story told by the same guy about a week or so apart, but to two different storytellers. So that's kind of interesting too. So we hope that when you read it, you're kind of excited about the differences in tellings and not bored at thinking you're getting the same thing over and over and over. So all in all, we have about 60 episodes, and we have 15 storytellers, and there'll be notes, there'll be their biographies. As I say, we'll have some told in English. We have some in English by Esther Shea. And I'm thinking, somebody asked me today if we're still going to have the X-rated stuff. In the turn of the century, if stuff was too X-rated for the popular readership, they often printed them in Latin. And if you read your Swanton Tlingit myths and texts, and you come to these Latin parts, and if you've had even not terribly profound medical training, you can usually recognize the body parts. And you say, oh my, these are the male and female genitalia. What is Raven doing with them, you know? And so they're from pretty, not only scatological, but they say, oh, they could be X or R rated stories. But I had a guy lined up to do the Latin. My Latin is not all that good. If any of you are fluent in Latin and would like to get a job transcribing or translating, I'd like to put them in there. That's called private parts. Translations of episodes published in Latin by Swanton. And then finally, we'll try to do something with the canon. And I'll mention some of the stories that are here, and then we've got others too. The cycle usually begins with the birth of Raven, with Raven and his uncle. And uncle is jealous of his nephew and is always trying to kill him, and Raven keeps eluding. He's got an obsidian tree, you know, that comes down and cuts him to shreds, and a canoe that closes and kills people. And so uncle will say, hey kid, you know, come on nephew, help me with my canoe, and then the canoe. So anyhow, Raven manages to elude that. And then he's got this problem with his uncle's wife in some of the versions, which is very interesting. And anyhow, then there's one, De Laguna has Raven and his echo. We don't have too much of that. But the tide controller, where Raven wants to go down, and he gets the sea urchin, and he bounces it on either the old lady or the old man's butt, depending on which version you have. Raven's always tricking his partner, so we've got a couple of episodes of that. And Raven and the Whale, that's what Catherine Mills calls the Raven was the first submarine captain. And that's where Raven flies into the whale, and then he sets up camp down there in a campfire, and he's, you know, picking all of the internal organs of the whale and cooking them up. And finally the whale dies, of course, and he floats to shore. And this is real big in Yakutat, so if you get up there, they'll show you where he floated ashore. They'll show you where Raven pulled in the salmon box. I mean, this all happened right at Dry Bay, so you can go up there and see where that happened. Because Raven in Daylight, that's probably the most common one that everybody knows, where he changes himself into something, and that goes all over the state. So depending on where you are, it's what he changes himself into, and the girl swallows it and has the baby, and you know, they think, oh, this guy looks kind of strange. He looks like Raven, but you know, and then he cons the grandfather out of all of the goodies. There's some others. Raven steals the water. That's another very, very good one, and that's very popular. That's where he smears dog doo-doo on Canuck's butt to lure him away from his water, so Raven can get the water. Raven getting fire. The cons the particular bird. They all call the hawk owl. We're not quite sure what species it is. To go out, and of course the guy goes out and gets the fire, and as he's coming back, his beak is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But anyhow, we get fire, and that's how the owl got his short beak. The salmon raven in the salmon box, or the ark, or it's under various names in English. A lot of versions of that is where he brings in, uses the octopus tentacle cane to bring in the salmon run. And then Raven and the King Salmon is where he kills the king salmon, lures him ashore. That's the sort of let you and him fight. You won't believe what this guy's saying about you, and they get going. And then he kills them, and then he cons the little birds out of all of their share. He has them go get skunk cabbage and cons them. We have one by Nora's father that's very unusual. I've only heard Catherine Mills tell it. Same idea, where Raven cons the great blue heron into spitting up. He gets the seagull and the heron to fight, kicks him in the solar plexus, out pops the fish. Raven gets the fish and flies off, and these other two guys are squabbling on the beach. Then Raven and the bears, where the poor bears end up getting killed. At least the little birds, they get their bodies kind of rearranged. Robin gets the red breast, and the Steller's jay gets the feathers and all of that. Magpie gets the tail. The bear gets killed. Raven cons him into sacrificing his genitals for bait, and it doesn't work out. Anyhow, then Raven and Potlatch, I said that's kind of nice, where he goes and dances and he bungles a lot of things, losing his nose. Then there's a couple of others that De Laguna has that we don't. Anyhow, very, very exciting stuff, and that's pretty much the overview of the story. So if you have any questions again of any of that or anything else, we will turn it over at that point and then see where we go from here. Sorry?
Yeah, I had a question. How are we doing the geography, the geographic references? There are a number of them. You mentioned one. There's another one similar up in Yakutat.
Yeah.
They pulled in the ark.
Yeah.
And footprints on the beach or
Yeah.
on the rock or something. Are you mentioning those in notes?
Oh yeah. We're going to have notes. We'll also have a couple of maps. I would see us having one of the whole North Pacific Rim, and then one of Southeast in particular. And then wherever places are mentioned, we will comment on it. There's a couple of episodes I didn't mention in De Laguna and also in Robert Zuboff, where Raven names particular places as he goes along. I think after he gets the water, he has some beaches down around Cake, and I'm not sure. He gives some place names, and I'll have to check with Tom Thornton. Some of them are in the book and some not. So there's one particular, I think it's Red Bluff Bay he mentions and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a good question, and we'll try to note those. And of course, sometimes you get certain stories that are common up and down the coast, but everybody will say, yeah, it happened here. So we've got Raven and the salmon boy, if you remember, the Aquatatsin story is connected with Sitka and the Kiksadi, and very specific to place names. The whole salmon run in Sitka. It's also a Haida version, and there's also a Tsimshian version. And so the stories are interesting because all of them are highly localized, and so it goes all the way down the coast. And in the Tlingit version, the reason, the taboo that the child violates is commenting on the salmon is moldy. Oh, this is moldy salmon. And so he needs to go and have an out-of-body experience with the salmon people. The Haida version, I think, is the same. The Tsimshian version, though, is remarkably different in that there's no insulting the fish, but it's not using up last year's fish before the run begins. So it's the idea of getting enough food for the winter, using it, but getting it all back into the system so that the next run of fish can come. And if you're still got fish from last year in your freezer, it's not good, because you got to get all those fish parts back into the system so that they can reconstitute themselves and come back. So that's the focus more of that Simpson. And yeah, so good question. Mm-hmm.
If I'm understanding correctly, the things you were saying earlier today about who Raven is and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing is in your introduction.
Yeah.
Will there also be commentary or explications along with each story, or is it just presenting the story and well, the geography and the dates and things like that?
Now, well, for just like most of the rest of our, in fact, all of the rest of our stuff, wherever there's something that we think is worthy of a note, then we'll make a note and point out differences, maybe between versions, or why this is important, and there's a lot of things that might miss, like I think both Robert Zuboff and I think also Charlie Joseph are kind of crabby about some of the way some of the legislation turned out for land claims and other kinds of things, and so they're talking about, so they're making their political point here. So they're using the story to like the salmon box, that all of this stuff coming in, but now you got Fish and Game regulating us, so you got permits and got all of this stuff, and if it were up to me, I wouldn't do that, kind of thing. And and also some of the places people have comments. I think, like Robert Zuboff in a story that's not in the book because it's not a Raven story, but the one about the mosquitoes. And after he tells the story, he says, he makes it very, very clear. He said that God loved the world. God did not create evil. People create their own evil. And, like, look at here, who created the mosquito? That came out of revenge, because this kid wanted to get revenge, and he shouldn't have done that. If he just let well enough be, he killed the cannibal giant, but now he wants to really get one more lick in, so he's going to burn him and all that, so now out of the ashes come the mosquito. And so it's kind of neat, because these guys think about the stories, and then some of them do make it kind of explicit comments and stuff like that. Kathy?
Prometheus in the Greek legend of seizing fire, giving the fire to humanity, has some parallels with Raven. Does the comparative part of that interest the two of you?
It does, but it's more. I've never really gone into it because we've just been so busy doing other things. But it would be, what people's motifs are and how things came to be. Certainly, this is an important thing for the elders. Most of the elders, connect the flood and the biblical flood. So we've got that, and we've got different creation stories and how things came to be, and fire, and I guess Prometheus as a would be a trickster too, or something. It's also in trickster figures around the world is a nice connection, because they're quite different. You have them in Scandinavian mythology, and trickster figures are alive and well. I've always viewed, I guess, like the TV series Hogan's Hero. They're kind of the underdog, and there's a whole book on Hebrew literature. Is like the whole Joseph sequence is basically on guys who are able to survive by cunning, because if they can't survive by being open and honest, or they'd be killed. So they're kind of surviving that way. My favorite, I've argued, and people disagree with me, James Bond is trickster. Because the guy, especially Moonraker is my favorite, because he saves the world, okay, and he's morally totally ambivalent. how would you like to be a Bond girl? You get killed usually pretty horribly in the first reel, torn apart by dogs or painted, the gold in gold fingers. So Bond goes through women like, people go through, candy cane or something. But in the total destruction of property, how many cars he goes through and all of that. So, and he has a license to kill. I mean, this is great. Wouldn't everybody, he's the ultimate, teenage bachelor figure. You get all the women you want, all the cars you want. You got a license to kill. What could be better? So anyhow, he's an interesting guy. But in Moonraker, he and he usually saves the day. Like in Goldfinger, where he's got 007 seconds before the bomb goes off, and Fort Knox, and then up there in Moonraker, he's actually out in outer space saving the world. So this is a good character. So Bond is trickster, something to think about. Chuck?
One more question.
Keep them coming.
I wondered if you're open to reconsider your thinking on this private parts section, because I had a discussion with Freddie de Laguna once about Swanton's work, and we both felt that Tlingit is Tlingit, and putting Latin in a Tlingit text.
Oh, it'll be in English.
Might have been what was done then, but you wouldn't do it today.
Mm-hmm.
And so we agreed. She was very emphatic that should be. I was talking to her about reprinting Swanton. She said, well, one of the things you have to do is to take that Latin out.
I know. You're.
And make it Tlingit, because it's a Tlingit story. It's not a Latin story.
Well, we don't have the Tlingit for it, but we could translate the Latin into Tlingit, and then.
You have to get permission from the Tlingit. If you call it that.
We could mess it up. It's so easy to mess up.
So I could do the.
One guy was interviewing my grandmother, and he asked her, how old are you? But before he asked her, she says, test the two, which means we never counted. And he asked her how old she was. And she said, test the two. And he wrote down 52.
Well, we can certainly discuss this. They say we're a long way off. I could translate, I know the first two lines, Corvus Dixit, okay, Raven said.
Where?
That's the Latin part that I have it memorized. No. You'll be happy to know that one of the texts I've been working with over the years is the Greek Anthology, which is a collection of Greek poetry primarily from, say, 250 BC to 900 AD. And it had Greek on one side and English on the other. This is published by Harvard University in the Loeb Library. And there are a few poems in there that are so R to X rated in Greek that they don't translate them into English, they translate them into Latin. So fortunately, my Greek is better than my Latin, so I can, I studied Greek and passed exams in that, but I never got too far in Latin. But anyhow, it was a common practice. Now today, I suppose they wouldn't have any problems putting it in English. But it's part of the history of the history of the documentation of the language, and it goes. Swanton's very interesting character. I wish he'd done more of who these storytellers were, because we have one Kadashan's mother doesn't tell us an awful lot. But we do have some of the, like Deki Nak. We do have a picture of him. His English name was Haida Charlie, and then there's a great picture of the guy sitting with an American flag behind him at the Sitka airport there by the baggage claim. At least for years there was this picture of this guy with a big flag behind him. And that's him. He's one of the storytellers for Swanton. So, anyhow, we'll consider it.
Well, just a couple things. Latin terms has kind of become a euphemism for obscenities, but Latin words. But my question, so this is about a book that you're writing, or you've already written, or I'm not quite following what.
The answer is yeah. The answer is yes. It is about 99%, I hope, there. We still have some stories to transcribe, and we have massive amounts of proofreading to do, just because we like to have somebody else other than ourselves proofread it, and there are not too many Tlingit proofreaders around. And so yeah, and we hope to be done with the manuscript by September 30th, and at that point we will be negotiating with University of Washington Press. It'll be a joint publication of Sealaska Heritage Institute, Tlingit Readers, which is our organization that had the grant, and University of Washington Press. And it will be volume 5 in our series, of which Chuck showed you the first couple. And so that's where it is. So what we need to do, like when I go home, I got to get back on transcribing Austin Hammond and things, translating that, and proofreading. Nora's proofreading 2 things with Lance and Carrie, and then she's transcribing something with Carrie. So anyhow, to say the little bits and pieces.
And your names are they in the program, so I can look for your
Yes,
writings?
they're going to be all over.
Under the Raven talk?
Unfortunately not. I don't know. Is it? Oh,
Okay.
oh, okay. Here in the one I've got it.
All right.
Okay,
that's good.
the online
That's
version
all I
didn't
really
have us,
needed to know.
but yeah, those of you who got the can't tell the players without the scorecard.
Right.
As they say.
We can Google you now.
Oh yes, we are very Googleable. By the way, be careful with some of the Google stuff, because they confuse me and Nora. So they have Nora born in Syracuse, New York, and not true. And so be careful what you read online, because they say garbage in, garbage
What
out.
do you write?
But there's some good stuff on there. But we, yeah, and we do have the.
Pocket guide.
Oh, good.
They're in the full program.
Yeah.
They are in the pocket guide.
Okay.
15, page 15.
Yes, Kathy is an excellent bibliographer and proofreader. And, Kathy's proofread all of our English stuff for our last book, and she doesn't hang out her card and her shingle in Tlingit, but she's an incredible proofreader for all of the other stuff. Linda Bellardi, by the way, is a very good proofreader, because she is so impaired visually that she uses huge magnification. She goes through it and she finds the missing periods and the missing commas. It's incredible. So we have like the more people we run the stuff by, the less danger we are of typos or horrible factual errors or things like that. Yes, indeed. Question? Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes. No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I do a lot of proofreading, so you have my sympathy. I've got a
Thank
lot
you.
of people to do. And do you have a map maker? Who is your map maker?
Yeah, we've had Michael Travis has helped us on this, and we've had other people in this. I can't remember who did the one in the Sitka book. Yeah.
And I just have to share one thing with you. The Dalai Lama once said, I don't believe in taking life, but oh, those mosquitoes.
Yeah. Questions, comments?
Edgar Allan Poe keeps going through my head.
Raven, Edgar Allan Poe. Both the Raven, Nevermore. Yeah. Say again?
Is there any cross references between Tlingit Raven and Poe?
What's the poem about?
It's called the Raven.
I know the Raven, but there's a spoof. Here comes Poe with his Raven, something or other, like Barnaby Gudge or something like that. Something about inspiration and the rest pure fudge. So I can't remember. I'm sure if you, Kathy could probably find it in 30 seconds online of, Poe and it's a spoof. It's a parody on the Raven and pure. I don't know. She's actually doing it. Question?
I was wondering what you thought of Dennis Tedlock's attempt to represent performance values typographically, and if you considered any of that for this volume.
Yeah, that absolutely has inspired us. I mean, we got our the idea of transcribing in the short line from him. We didn't go to the extremes of the point sizes, for shot. We did our very first drafts of the oratory. But Tlingit is chanted like this, and so every line becomes bold-faced. So we finally didn't do that. But the idea of the breath unit and the short line format, yeah, we've stuck with that. One thing we have not gone through or gone to is Dennis or Del Himes and Virginia Himes also came up with a system of organizing by stanzas and verse and acts and stuff like that, and it basically has to do with indentations and page layout. And we don't disagree with that, but we tried it on a couple of stories, and it's so time-consuming. And Ron Scollin, when he did his very last book on the Fan Kuei Li stories by Mandeville, did this, and I think it really works beautifully because you get the idea of when you signal a change in in Tlingit as well as in some of the Athabaskan languages, this is geared by what kind of verb you end the passage with, and then what kind of transition you use. So you get a sense that you're moving to a new topic or something. So maybe in our super golden declining years would try to do some of the stories. We did one for the White Horse Conference where we took a couple of stories and tried to set them up like that. And it's very dramatic because you can kind of get a sense of that. Del Himes came on that by going through these 19th century, like the Smithsonian things, and they're all set up as paragraphs. And his idea was that you could discover verse and some kind of organization within that by the as they say, the verbs that were, like you end a main verb, something is going to happen. Now you're going to go to a different. Now in Tlingit, what's very interesting and almost impossible to translate, Tlingit uses the perfective form of the verb to advance the story, and then it uses the imperfective to fill in the details. So all of a sudden when you get a new perfective, so it's like Raven walking on the beach. So very often you hear we had gerund in English. And there's also insubordination, which James Crippen and Seth Cable kind of came on, and it had been in front of us for 20 years, and I hadn't figured it out. It's like a title that it's like Raven when he was stealing the salmon. And he said, well, what do you do with this? Well, it's sort of a built-in, as they call it, insubordination, because it's a subordinate clause, but not subordinate to anything else. So you've got that popped in there to kind of set you going. And then there'll be a main verb, or so like you might have Raven walking along the beach. He saw the king salmon, so perfective verb. King salmon is swimming out there. King salmon is splashing around. So now you're switching back to sort of what we would call present tense, and it fills in all the detail. So then all of a sudden you get another verb. Raven called him. Now you got a perfective verb. You know that the story is being advanced, and now there's going to be more detail filling in the story. So there's all this kind of syntactic stuff going on, and we tried to, how to translate this, because you don't want to sound illiterate, and in Tlingit it's not. It's They sound sort of like Damon Runyon. There I am standing in the corner of 41st and Broadway, and I see this guy, and he comes up to me and he says, let's go get a beer. Or, in English, though, the big problem is what happens if you hear somebody tell you something in the present tense. It's a joke. Guy walks into a bar. I mean, you never say a guy walked into a bar. This guy is walking along the street. Immediately, you're being set up for a joke. You know that this is a joke because it may, in a very serious context, be historical present. Like it's November 22nd and John Kennedy is driving along in Dallas. So you know that's not going to be a joke, but you know that it's taking you back to that present moment. So how we tell stories, how do you tell a funny story in English, and how do you tell a funny story in Tlingit, and how do you translate that so that you're not, making it sound, like something that it isn't. And we have spent probably 40 years trying it this way, trying it that way. Do you translate it very literally and have a footnote, or do you translate it very freely and have a footnote? Because sometimes freely is better, like the opening lines of Jesse's speech. Is literally, does it take pity on us? And a footnote, death. Or is it better to say, does death have pity on us? And then let people say, oh, they mistranslated it. Death is not there. They're putting it in there. But, so it's a problem, to say, because you want to make the greatest impact. You figure the people that are going to want to read it in Tlingit, they've got that whole side of the book to do it. But the people who are not going to be worrying about whether it's a perfective verb or a imperfective habitual bloppity blop, or you want to cut to the chase. So that's you're actually writing for those people. You want to be exciting and not dull. So we've kind of waffled. Is you don't want your translations to be overly technical, but you don't want them to be super free. And we do like to, coming back to this thing with the Dennis Tedlock, we like to reflect the line turnings as much as possible. Sometimes it's hard. The biggest problem in Tlingit translating is that there's no gender distinction between he and she. And then there's yet another fourth person pronoun in Tlingit, the hitherto, or the, what do you call it, the above mentioned person. So in other words, you're talking about Raven's doing this, and he sees his brother-in-law. In fact, this came up in the section I was working on with Austin. Raven is out in his canoe paddling, and his brother-in-law Kanuk is out paddling in his canoe, and he saw him coming toward him. Who's talking? As Raven saw Kanuk paddling toward him. So then he paddled toward him. So now wait a minute. Now who's paddling toward who? And so sometimes we have to slip in a pronoun or a noun like Raven, because otherwise you're so lost by the end that sometimes you can figure it out because they're using this pronoun, the above mentioned hither or herein for whatever. I mean, we just don't have a word for it. It's the guy we're talking about. And those are hard ones to. And then you don't know sometimes if the character's a man or a woman, and some storytellers have it one way, some have it another. Anyhow, sorry to ramble on there, but
that's important. Translation is always the key to. I work on Japanese to English translations and fantasy stories, and always what we found is most effective is an English speaking and a native speaking and an English speaking translator working together, which I see you. I'm sure you figured that out on your own. But even so, this sounds daunting. Gender's constant tense shifting. How are you handling this?
And it's also hard. the discourse sequence is different. Like in English, we might have something as 1, 2, 3, but in Tlingit it might be 3, 2, 1. So the order in which you present your information. And so Nora and I go round and round, and I said, this doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. So it's a real issue there. Lee, thank
Just quickly, you started out with describing a story that was funny, but people didn't know when to laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an example that you can?
Just the whole, like when the Nora's plays, I mean, they're just outrageous. I mean, and my favorite example is Bob Sam as a storyteller.
Oh, he's great.
And he's absolutely deadpan, expressionless, with this kind of talking. And behind him on the stage are these actors, and they're just upstaging him no end. I mean, and it's just, and with these things that are going on, and or just any of the things, just telling people it's okay to laugh. It's not politically incorrect. Somebody's not going to come at you for discrimination for laughing at, because this is comedy. This is the comic genre of the Tlingit, and there's stories that anybody can tell. You don't have to be a raven. You can be an eagle and tell them, and they vary. Some of the story, a lot of the people like to play around on.
They might not understand them.
Yeah, but just the idea. Here's Raven conning somebody out of something. Here's Raven smearing dog doo-doo on Petrel's butt, to get him to. I mean, that's hilarious. I mean, it's just, to me, I don't know if it's scatological humor here, but he then he's coming in and saying, oh, geez, I hate to do this, but how do you got to? Here, the problem is he wants the water. Ganuk is sitting on his container with the water. How is he going to get the guy off? And then how you handle, Nora likes to use some of the colloquial language. Hey, partner, you got a problem. This is gross. And then, but just the humor in general, and because I'm trying to think of some other examples there. Well, anyone, I mean.
Maybe people get confused about Raven being a creator. You don't want to laugh at a creator. Because of that book, Make Prayers to the Raven.
Yeah.
I never.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe Raven was several people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You want the idea of respect for nature and the respect for things, but. And I'm not sure that with Dick Nelson's, and I haven't studied, say, Koyukan enough to really know.
Maybe Howard Luke knows.
Yeah, this would, we have a very distinguished Athabaskan elder here, Howard Luke, and the question was how Raven is understood in Athabaskan with Dick Nelson's book, Make Prayers to the Raven, and how in your area, how Raven is considered.
Well, the Raven is the one that let us know what's going to happen again. So we listen. Raven at night, it's not, you can't tell Raven at night. That's going to be something that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one that will learn it. So we listen to that Raven all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one that named all the birds.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that named them. So that's our traditional way. We don't talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I go, and
I'll,
Paraphrase what he said.
pardon?
Could you try to repeat?
Yes, that's what as I understand, he's saying that, first of all, Raven named all of the birds, and you get vestiges of this, I think, in Tlingit too. If I'm understanding him correctly, he's saying the main thing, the attitude toward Raven is to observe, kind of see what's going on, and it's kind of a way of sort of talking a little bit about the future, that if Raven is doing something good, that this means that you're going to have good luck, so to speak. I may be oversimplifying this, but otherwise that there may be danger in the future and you've got to be careful. I don't know if I'm understanding that correctly or not. But, yeah.
I don't know where people run out of equipment and stuff like that, you know. If you see that Raven flying over that thing, and you call him, you see him on that, he said, and if he turned over that thing, turned over, that moves. What do you mean by you see him on that? He says, you're going to come back. That's what you mean. And you go that way, so can moves whatever you.
He's saying that as an example, if you run out of food and you're hunting and you need something, you kind of look at the raven and then you can talk to it and say, hey, you know, roll over.
Dear God.
Or well, roll over or whatever. And then if the raven starts doing some kind of acrobatics, then you know that there's game underneath and you can head out in that direction. That, you know, yeah. And I've always wondered when I'm hunting if I'm hearing something, if it's alerting to where the deer is, because some of the ravens love to come and get what's left over, or you know, whether they're telling the deer there's a hunter coming, or whether they're telling the hunter there's a deer there. It's probably the fact that, probably the latter, knowing that they're going to benefit from it. But, thank you very much.
I just had one question for Nora about the translation. Okay, so I can see that it's a very difficult task, and because you're going from you're going from Tlingit, which makes perfect sense to Tlingit people, into English, which makes no sense to Tlingit people at all, and vice versa. Plus, you're going from oral tradition to written. Oral can be very fluid like that. It's just whatever the speaker remembers, and written, everything has to be pinned down. So I'm curious, from Nora's point of view, what's the most difficult part of the translation?
The question is, what's the most difficult part of translation for you, going, say, from Tlingit to English or English to Tlingit?
Can I just describe what I saw when
Okay.
she was transcribing?
Yeah.
Initially, when she started this, there were discs, the little cassette recorder disc, and she would sit there with earphones and play, back, play, and write at the same time. But one cassette tape took weeks,
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
One story could take days
Yeah.
because of the quality
Yeah.
of the tape. I mean, they were way back in the
It
60s
takes a
and
lot of
70s, and here
time.
we are, and yeah.
Oh, you did that, didn't you? Oh,
It was tedious.
It takes a lot of time.
It certainly does. That's the most difficult part, yeah.
Yeah, so there's two aspects. One is the work that we do, the transcription. So, and that, as Lee was saying, we started with cassettes, and there's now some of the new stuff is very nice, like Elan, where you can get it timed, but we started with reel to reel and then cassettes and on. So that's the first part of it, and that's where a lot of the proofreading difficulties. We want somebody to proofread our work, so there are not too many folks around. Then the translation issues come in that we've been talking about, where you've got it, and you're right. I mean, you're dealing. There are features. How do you do, like in an oral performance? Very often, storytellers will do, and that's that's a gesture. How do you translate gestures? I mean, you really can't. It's great when you can have video, because then you do get gestures, you get facial things, tone of voice. Amy Marvin in one of our stories has about 4 or 5 voices, and so she has the old woman, the young woman, the little girl, is the guy, and she has a different voice for this one. That one comes in, and again, what do you do on a printed page? Tedlock, I think he had made an effort at that. We're trying to show, give stage directions. So you're trying to do what you can with the oral performance, but dealing on the written page in another language, you're several removes. So you do what you can, and you win a few, you lose a few.
I think the transcription translation, the English is the hardest for me.
Yeah, finding the right English word.
But I have an expert.
It's hard. Like the verb. Here's the story I just mentioned about Raven and his brother-in-law, and they're out in canoes. Well, in Tlingit, there's a verb to walk, to be going on foot, and a verb to be going by a vehicle or by a boat, and then there's verbs for paddling and traveling. So you in one case you wanted to use travel. The other just basically going to be go or went, but the fact is that in English there's no distinction in go and went, whether it's by car or by boat or by foot. So am I cheating if I say he paddled over? Because it's not really paddled. I mean, it's because he went by boat, but you don't want to say he went by canoe over to the other canoe. I mean, it's really awkward as all hell.
It's better if you're a speaker of Tlingit.
Well, just a short comment. My father made a comment about translation. You kind of have to choose whether it's going to be beautiful or whether it's going to be faithful to the original. So if you want something that's beautiful, enjoyable to read, you can't always be accurate. If you want something that's super accurate for the more scholarly types, well, you gotta give up some of that beauty.
Yeah. It's hard. And then if you want a good study in translation, look at the Bible and look at the Hebrew Old Testament. I mean, it's so ambiguous, and the rabbis have been arguing for 2,000 years over the translations of it, and you're getting all these possible ones. Well, okay, you take this one here and you take this one there, and what does this mean theologically? And as I say, lots of luck.
Well, thank you very much. It's been
Okay.
amazing to hear all the intricacies of the work. We really enjoyed it.
That's why it takes 40 years, boys and girls.